Grow 'em Big with Steve Bartylla. Brought to you by Huntworth and these other fine sponsors.
For the last 15, 20 years or so, hinge cutting really has been the fad. Back when I used to do a bunch of photo evaluations for people and on-site consultations, I'll tell you what, if there's something that's messed up more woods than hinge cutting in an attempt to improve it, I'm not sure what the heck that is. Let's start, before we get into that much further, let's start by actually defining hinge cutting. Hinge cutting is the most dangerous timber cut you can do. What you're doing is you're going ahead and you're cutting through a tree just far enough to get it to tip over, but maintain that connection to the root system. The less you cut it, the more connective tissue, bark cambium layer there is, the more food and water can flow between the roots and the leaves and vice versa, the better off we are, the higher percent of those trees that are going to survive. There's certain tree species that just do not work, and this is what makes it so darn dangerous. Aspen, for example, red pine, white pine, you go ahead and try to hinge cut them, and what happens is they snap, and a chunk of that tree often comes flying up and could literally take your head right off. So how do we make this safer? Well, one, we follow every single darn chainsaw safety rule there is, period, end of story. We leave the dead trees alone, and we go ahead and we only deal with trees this size or smaller to start with, so they cannot hurt us. We do not even have to use a chainsaw, we can use a handsaw. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut just barely far enough through so we can literally grab the top of that tree and yank it down to the ground. Well, pull it down slowly, gradually, and gently so we don't snap it. Okay, you do that and your hinge cutting success rate goes up. Next, remember the height of the hinge cut matters. This is our scalpel. Use logging as your machete. The hinge cutting is a scalpel that we are trying to get specific tasks done in specific areas. Doe bedding, for example, I'll take a quarter to a half acre area and I will hinge cut those trees within the smaller ones that I feel safe doing, the low timber value ones. In that case, I want to cut them pretty darn high. I want them about chest high because I want the deer to be able to get underneath it. What I'll do is I'll take the bigger trees that I'm going to take first, drop them down, and then lay the other trees on top of it. When it comes to edge feathering is just taking a 5-yard wide band around our food plot and hinge cutting the low timber value smaller trees. You want to get rid of the rest of the trees so you can get better sunlight in? Take your high timber value ones and sell them. Okay, but you're hinge cutting these and smaller, and you're using that to learn which species hinge cut well before you start getting any bigger. Okay, so you go ahead and you hinge cut that 5-yard wide band around that food plot. You edge feather it so now more sun can get in, and you're creating a living smorgasbord of food out there for those whitetails. With all that canopy you've dropped, you've got all these weeds, sprouts, all that stuff coming up along with all those buds and leaves of the trees that you did hinge cut. Then you can also use these as blockades. In that case, what you're doing is you're altering the height, just like you do in the edge feathering. It doesn't matter what height you're edge feathering at. A blockade, it does. You want to alternate it because what you're trying to do is you're trying to create a blockade. Make it so they can't get through here. You don't want to do 100-yard blockades, but 20, 10-yard blockade work very effectively. And lastly, what I'll use it for, hinge cutting, is to create tornadoes, what I call tornado zones. And in here, I'm just trying to create a mess. And I'm cutting a whole bunch of them low, about knee height, because I want to make it so it is a massive pain for these deer to get through there. I don't do that very often, but what I'm doing there is I'm creating a safe wind direction for myself. Okay, but just remember, through all this, we can achieve everything I just talked about through traditional logging practices as well. The advantage of hinge cutting is boom, it is just that quick. But please do not go out onto your 40 and hinge cut 20 acres. On a 40, if you're hinge cutting 4 acres, that's probably too much. You're looking at 1 to 2, that's it. Don't trash your future timber values. Instead, use it as a very, very precise tool to achieve very specific goals. Final thoughts, brought to you by Huntworth. Hinge cutting is nothing more than cutting just barely far enough through the tree so you can yank it down, and it maintains that connection to the root system through the bark. The more bark that's left connected, the higher your survival rate. Remember, the height of these hinge cuts matter. You go out there and you hinge cut a bedding area about 3 feet off the ground, well, you're probably not going to have many deer using it because it's a real pain to get through there. Logging is your machete. Hinge cutting is your scalpel. Use it that way, plan out your improvements, and you're going to get a lot farther.